So what I did at Facebook was I created this program where the people from these departments would learn how to cope with these horrible, horrible exposures that they were having to people's behavior. And one of the ways that we would do this was by fortifying their abilities to be, for example, self-compassionate, fortifying ways to make sure that their off work time was having them being engaged in activities that would incur flow, something that was just challenging and fun and brought them alive. And I'd also help them with a taxonomy, a whole naming system of like what's going on inside of a terrorist's head so that they could understand that better. They could understand the horrible behaviors, not justifying horrible behaviors, but knowing the minds of a psychopath, for example.
Welcome to the Psych and Business Podcast. We're here to show you how practical psychology can be useful and make your workplace better. I'm Dr. Ernest Wayde. All right, our guest today is a psychologist, a podcast host, an author, and a resiliency expert. His name is Dr. Adam Dorsay. Now, Dr. Dorsay is also an executive coach in Silicon Valley where he works with high-achieving adults. And we're talking about professionals, executives, entrepreneurs, and professional athletes. Adam is the host of Super Psyched, an award-winning podcast with over 200 episodes. He's also the author of a book by the same name, and I know we're going to talk about that later. Adam, welcome to the show.
Ernest, I am so happy to be with you.
Adam, I was really excited when I heard about you, and I'm really glad to have you come on the show. I want to get into the stuff that you do, but before that, tell us about yourself. How'd you get into this kind of work, and tell us about your journey?
It's really funny. When my mom, we're going way back, my mom said that when she'd push me in the stroller, I was the most connective baby she's ever seen. Like I was trying to get eye contact with everybody who passed by. And somewhere when I was 14, I remember being at summer camp telling one of my fellow campers, I want to be a psychologist someday.
That's awesome.
And and there were some hurdles that kind of were unexpected. I had ADHD of the inattentive type, so I was staring out the window. Nobody really recognized it because I wasn't harming anybody. I wasn't hanging from the chandelier, but I was just kind of looking at squirrels, and I wasn't learning. And it was assumed that I probably did not have the intellectual capacity to explore something like a doctorate at any point in life. Making matters worse, I was dyslexic. So after I graduated from college, I entered a psychology program and realized, oh my gosh, this is really, really hard at this stage in my life. And I dropped it. I went into the work world. Work was much easier in the corporate arena. And I worked in the US and Japan, and that was good. And eventually I married a psychologist. And every day I had to hear about her day and thinking to myself, that should have been my day. And fortunately, she was a very supportive woman. And she said, I really want you happy. Go explore this. And a buddy of mine, Aaron from college, said the same thing. Without other people in our lives who really see us well and mirror us well, we're kind of lost. And fortunately, I've had some pretty good mirrors. They both said, I don't care how old you are, go do this.
Yeah.
And so I did. And so I left my fairly well paid corporate job with benefits. And during my postdoc, I had no benefits. I was making $10 an hour. I was getting my hours and getting good supervision, but boy, not exactly a financial dream come true, except for the fact that ultimately it did pay off. I got to do what I love doing, and now I'm here, and I couldn't be happier about it.
I love that. That's such a great journey. And I love the fact that you have people in your life who are able to help you see, hey, seek life elsewhere. You can be happier elsewhere, and you can take that risk, to take that step, and the support that you had. So I love that journey. And now it's gotten you to this great place. So tell us about the work that you do now, because you do so much. So tell us a little bit about that.
It's so funny. I expected I would work primarily with females. And prior to licensure, that was the case. As soon as I became licensed, it was like a parade of heavy-hitting men were knocking at my door. And I just kind of didn't know what my specialty would be until it presented itself. And lo and behold, it was that, working with guys who might be reluctant to start therapy, who might not believe in therapy, who might be there at the behest of their wives. And during a first session, they might say something like, hey, man, I don't believe in this. You've got 50 minutes to show me that this isn't just a bunch of crap.
Yeah.
And I don't remember the last time somebody didn't stay. The men I've worked with have been great. And sometimes I'll get a voicemail from a wife will say, "Hello, Dr. Dorsay. I know you can't call me back, but I just love my husband just even all the more. He's the guy I fell in love with back when we were dating and somehow had forgotten."
Hmm.
Or he's just so much more communicative, and I find that so attractive and sexy. Whatever it might be, but some people worry that if they go into therapy, they will be less manly or less whatever, less real.
Hmm.
And what I've found is the exact opposite. They actually become more of who they actually are. They become way more real, and they become really more in touch with their emotions and able to learn how to express them, how to really mine the data of
Hmm.
their emotions so that they can do better and that everyone around them can do better. So
And
I actually
this
gave
is what
one
I
of the
love about what you do is you take this mindfulness approach, right, in the clinical world, and then you take that into the coaching and the business world. So how did you make that transition? And talk about how, mental health at home and how that impacts the workplace.
100%. My apologies in advance for this one. You're walking through Disneyland, you walk by, it's a small world. What do you hear for the rest of the day? You hear it's a small world. And what are we well paid to do at work? We're well paid to look for problems. So if we hear it's a small world after walking by it, and if
Hmm.
we are well paid to look for problems, what do we look for when we get home? We look for
Same thing.
problems.
Yeah.
And one of the things we know for sure is John Gottman, who used to be a mathematician, who's now a psychologist and has added tremendously to the world of couple therapy. He came up with a 5-to-1 ratio of positive to negative. In order to stay positive, we need to have 5 positive interactions for every negative interaction.
Hmm.
And if we're well paid to look for problems and we come home and all we're looking for is problems, thinking that the only way we're going to get better at home is by looking for problems, we've got a problem.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I try to help people do is look for what's good. Positive psychology, which has been one of the most heavily researched arms in all of psychology, particularly because they were trying to make up for the kind of taboo of looking for happy, whatever that is. It just like what is happy? How do we qualify it? How do we quantify it? Um, they have gone very, very far in their research to show that their methods really work. So one of the things we do is we try to override that negativity bias, that thing that causes us when we go on vacation to remember the bad things that happen more than the good things that happen. It could be anything. And we become insufferable. So one of the things I try to help my people do is look for the good, be a Sherlock Holmes trying to find the positive, trying to get more curious than furious, trying to really override the negativity bias by, yeah, still look for the problems at work.
Hmm.
But when you come home, look for what's good.
Mm. Yeah, I love that, acknowledge that there are problems, but also acknowledge that there are a lot of good things, right? And I love that 5-to-1 ratio, because if you don't look for it, you'll miss them, but they're there. There's a lot of good things going on around you. And so it's important to look for that. I love your focus though on also recognizing that there are challenges, right? And I appreciate that you're also a resiliency expert. So talk to us about that. How does that all fit in here?
Sure. Well, it's really interesting. When I was a newly minted psychologist, I was called by Facebook, an executive there. They said that in their trust and safety department, their counterterrorism and child safety departments, which see a lot of really, really nasty human behavior, like the worst when it comes to terrorism or treatment of children.
Mm.
And some of the folks who were working there were experiencing something called vicarious trauma. They'd see an image. It was hard to get that image out of their head. It might change their worldview. Like, wow, how could something this horrible happen?
Yeah.
And what doesn't kill you makes you stronger is a little bit off. I would say what doesn't kill you might make you stronger. It depends on how you learn how to cope with that thing. It could make you
Mm.
actually a lot weaker, that thing that didn't
Yeah.
kill you. But if you know how to cope well versus coping poorly, so let's say two people go through the same horrible incident. The first one self medicates with alcohol, the second one self medicates with better coping strategies like going to the gym, engaging in mindfulness,
Mm.
exploring therapy, or something like that, or any combination. These two people have vastly different trajectories. The first person will actually get weaker. The second person will get stronger
Mm.
if the coping is good.
Yeah.
So what I did at Facebook was I created this program where the people from these departments would learn how to cope with these horrible, horrible exposures that they were having to people's behavior. And one of the ways that we would do this was by fortifying their abilities to be, for example, self-compassionate, fortifying ways to make sure that their off work time was having them being engaged in activities that would incur flow, something that was just challenging and fun and brought them alive. And I'd also help them with a taxonomy, a whole naming system of like, what's going on inside of a terrorist's head so that they could understand that better. They could understand the horrible behaviors, not justifying horrible behaviors, but knowing the minds of a psychopath, for example, can be very helpful. It's like, oh, there's a word for that horrible behavior, and that's what they're doing. Doesn't justify it, but it at least helps me understand what is going on. It can be so overwhelming for a child when they first see Darth Vader. They know Darth Vader is really bad. They see in the first movie, they see him pick this guy up by the neck, and like, for a child who doesn't understand that that is psychopathic behavior, that's a bit overwhelming. But for somebody who's a little bit grown up and can actually say, okay, there are some people like that. Most people are not like that.
Yeah.
And here's what we can do about it. So these were the things that we were doing at Facebook. It was just phenomenal. Spent 4 years there. It went international. It was great. I still do that work at another company, cloud computing company called DigitalOcean, with their trust and safety department.
I love what you did there, because basically what you did was you gave them a framework to help them cope, right? Because you made such a great point in terms of we may all experience the same thing, but it's how you cope with it, how you respond and react to it, which is really important. And you gave them a healthy way of doing that. So I love the work that you've done there. Talk to us about some of the work that you've done in terms of your coaching with professionals and executives in that way, right? Helping them cope in the business environment, because sometimes we don't appreciate how stressful it can be to be an executive or an athlete or whatever. So talk to us a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, I love the executive coaching. It kind of looks at where are you now, where do you want to be, and how we're going to get you there. And oftentimes their stated goals are not their actual goals. Sometimes they say that they want, I don't know, they want better metrics at work. And what they're really wanting, sure, they do want the better metrics at work, and we work on that. But what they're actually saying after a few coaching calls is they're wanting to learn how to communicate with their colleagues and the people who report to them better. And they want to learn actually how to motivate them. And what they need to learn is how to engage language. Could even be something like love languages at work. If you're familiar with the 5 love languages, it's being able to communicate with somebody in a way that is actually rich for them. And oftentimes we'll end up going down that path of learning, like, well, the way you communicate with Steve is going to be different from the way you communicate with Sue. They need different things.
Yeah.
And when you're trying to motivate an entire team and you just give one blanket message, you may be reaching 60% of them, but 40% of them you may be missing out on. How do you do that? And sometimes that'll happen in the coaching calls. And it's really exciting to find out how it evolves. It's often the first call is vastly different from, say, the 8th. And things have morphed, and it's like, well, what I'm really needing to work on is this. The thing I said I wanted to work on was the thing that was actually just kind of more on the surface, and it was a little safer for me to say.
Yeah.
But I wasn't even willing to identify something. So once that rapport is built, and that's one of the reasons why I don't think AI can replace us, is that rapport has to be built. That show me you know me idea exists for all of us.
Yeah.
Whether it's the coaching client or the people they're trying to serve through the coaching practices that we're engaging in. They may be trying to serve other people and show them that they know them.
I think that's one of the really interesting things as a psychologist, especially who does coaching and things like that, is you're trained on how to build rapport. You're trained as to be a listener, to understand human behavior. So tell us a little bit about how you came up with the Super Psyched podcast and how that evolved into a book. I'd love to hear that story as well.
Dude, that's so funny. Well, I'd given a couple of TEDx talks and loved doing that. And one thing I love about that is the learning process itself. My wife and I are both psychologists, and this is really funny to say, but when we travel, we still bring psych magazines and psych stuff to read by the poolside. We're just that into it.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't feel like work. It just feels like an ongoing Indiana Jones-like exploration. Well, in 2020, many of you probably remember, or somewhere around March, something happened. I forget what it was. It was something like COVID. And within COVID, I wasn't driving my children to school. And my father very wisely said, "Hey, Adam, you've always wanted to do a podcast. You're not driving your kids to school. You've got a few extra hours. Why not give it a go?" And I thought about it. I was like, yeah, Dad. My dad is often just like throws a pitch that is just right down the pipe. And that was one of those times. And I thought about it and I thought, okay, what will the name be? What will I be going after? What will I hope that my listeners get from the podcast? What will the name be? My nickname in high school was Enthusiasm. So when I came upon the word Super Psyched in my mind, I thought, perfect. And I'd come up with several other possible names for it that were not even close to being good. And one of the things I'd learned when I was with some of the people who were on my own podcast was you need to have a lot of ideas to get a good idea. Some of the ideas might even be crap. So even the name itself was the byproduct of many, many, many ideas. And the perspective was I wanted the material that will make people's life a little bit richer, a little bit more vital, so that they feel more super psyched. Mm-hmm. And super psyched doesn't necessarily just mean happy all the time. It means being super connected to our psyches, like really connected with who we are in this little lifetime that we have, this little dash between our birth. My cat just walked by. Between our birth date and our death date. Are you going to rock that dash? And this is what I was going for with the podcast, helping people ensure that they're actually alive while they're living, super connected to their psyches, whatever that means. And I felt like I was I've got a cat's tail around my neck, which is very funny. One of the benefits of COVID has been being able to meet with people like you, just virtually, and seeing people's pets show up at funny times. But this podcast has been one of the most joyful things I've ever done. Before I meet with a guest, I read their book. If they have a book, I get to really geek out with them, and I get to learn, and I get to share that learning with the people who listen, and get emails from folks saying, "My gosh, this is really this episode really hit hard," and it could cover the typical things out of psychology like panic attacks and improving your relationship and sexuality. Could also include some pretty out there stuff. I interviewed one guy, because I'm a barbecue lover, on the Black history of barbecue, and Adrian Miller. He's Beard, what's it called? What are they? Well, those James Beard Award winner. He used to serve under amazing human being. He told me, about the Black history of barbecue in our country. I got to do one on the history of ice cream, and did one on coffee. But I do them on all kinds of topics, and I gotta tell you, Ernest, it's been one of the most fun things I've ever done.
Yeah.
And I almost feel like if you want to learn about something, do a podcast.
Yeah. I love that. One of the best things about me and podcasts is you learn so much and you get to meet awesome people. So I think that just that combination makes it worthwhile. So I know that now you have a book with the same name, Super Psyched, right? And you're really focusing on connecting with yourself, connecting with others, connecting with the world, and something greater. So tell us about how the book came about and what the book's about.
You got it. I've started 4 books. I've finished 1. This was the book I had to finish after doing about 20,000 hours of psychotherapy, after nearly 200 episodes at the time. Now I'm closer to 250 on my podcast, and reading lots. The one thing that kept showing up in every place I looked was this idea called connection. Everybody wanted this thing called connection, but no one really defined what connection meant, and certainly not beyond connecting with your significant other, connecting with your children. All of the connections were external connections rather than seeing it as four concentric circles coming from within, starting with from within, I should say. How we connect with ourselves, how we connect with others, how we connect with the world, and how we connect to something greater. And you do not have to believe in God to believe that there is something greater than me. Ernest, you and I together talking right now is something greater than me, myself, alone.
Mm.
That old African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Yeah.
That is something greater. I just watched the Yankees beat the, this is going to timestamp this, beat the Dodgers in game 4 of the World Series. The Yankees were more powerful together than any one of them alone. So we know that something greater could be that.
Yeah.
It could also, even the most orthodox atheist might go to Yosemite and just like, wow, and experience awe, AWE. And so there is something greater. I wanted to look at those four areas because I think that's the totality of connection. That is what we're looking for. And connection is vitality. Connection is aliveness. I and a group of other mental health practitioners aimed at coming up with a working definition of connection and how we can find it in our own lives and how each of us has unique connection formulas. Like what turns you on, brings you to life, and makes you feel that sense of vitality and aliveness might be different from what I experience. And there may be overlapping between us, but certainly there are differences. And I would even go so far as saying all 8 billion of us Earth inhabitants have different formulas, even just ever so slightly from one another, that no connection formula is the same. You just saw my cat run by me. My dad would rather go several lifetimes without an animal. I can barely go a day without being around at least one of my animals. I love being around animals. My pets mean the world to me. That's part of my connection formula. My father can sit through a 6-hour Wagnerian opera. I would call it a very expensive place to sleep. I do not want to sit through a 6-hour Wagnerian opera. Thank you. But he would be taking in every little bit of it. And for him, it would end far too soon. And for me, it would be like, dude, can we just go to dinner? I'm hungry and tired. So we have different connection formulas and we need to honor those. I'm just wondering, like, is there something I can feel your aliveness even just in this conversation, but just so that listeners know, I'm just curious, Ernest, what makes you come alive?
Oh, that's a great question. I think for me, there's a lot of things that I enjoy, and so for part of my challenge is narrowing my connection formula, right? Because there's so many things that make me feel connected, and so really trying to narrow it in. Just as an example, just connecting with new people. I love making new connections, but I like them to be deep connections, right? I'm not a surface guy. I'm not a hey, how's the weather kind of guy. I'm more of a hey, how's your day going? I really want to talk about how your day is actually going and how you're actually feeling. So that I love that deep connection. So that's part of my formula. I'm hearing you talk about connection. And I'm thinking about how do you think this works in the workplace? Because we spend so much of our time, especially I remember when I worked in a physical office, I spent so much of my time in an effort with my coworkers. How do you think that connection piece really works? Because that's where you spend a lot of your time and your energy in the workplace.
Such a great question, Ernest. And by the way, what you said in terms of your sense of aliveness is very similar to my own. I don't like just talking about the weather. What you just said, in all likelihood, would predict that you and I would do very well as friends.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
that you and I would actually ask each other how the other's doing and actually want to know.
Mm-hmm.
So just saying that. In terms of work in the workplace, 90,000 hours approximately on average is how much time we will spend at work in our lifetime. So it's a very, very important part of our lives. If we look at our life as a pie chart, that constitutes a lot of our waking hours. And many of us kind of justify going to work at work that we don't like and say, well, it's work. It's not supposed to be fun. And for some of us, that is how it has to be. And so I'm not going to just say, oh, you know what, just change your jobs. It's easy as that. Hell no. Sometimes you got to do a job that you don't love doing because that is what's available in the geographic location where you live, and given whatever the demands are in that area for pay. It's really throughout the world. We all have different different opportunities. That said, when we are thinking about work, most of us are asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? Rather than what are the verbs you enjoy. So I got this idea from reading Think Again by Adam Grant, who I just love Adam Grant's work. He's a professor at Wharton, consistently year over year, rated the highest of professors. He's just brilliant. But he says, ask a child or ask a person who's considering work, what are their verbs? Because the job that they might want might not actually exist by the time they are viable to do that work. And that question could be asked to somebody in the workplace. What are your verbs? We actually did not know what a web designer was in the 80s. It wasn't a thing. And somebody might say, well, I really love graphic design. I really love hearing people's stories and telling their stories. And then lo and behold, when this idea comes out, it's like, well, those are your verbs. Okay, cool. And, web design might be your thing. The jobs that will be part of my children's future may not yet have been invented. An AI wrangler, it's a newish job. An Uber driver, very new job.
Yeah.
We did not know what that was.
I'm like, all of these things. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So think about your verbs and how well do they connect with the work you're doing now? Is it at all possible, if you actually do need to make a shift, for you to do so? Would it require additional education? In my case, while I was at a sales job that was semi-fulfilling, but it wasn't my dream job, I earned my master's and doctorate during my off hours. Not exactly easy to do. A lot of sacrifice. It meant I missed out on a lot of really cool stuff. But it was worth it. And the question then is, can you do something through distance learning to get the degree you need while you're at your work, so that you can get that other job? Is this job consistent? Also, are the people with whom you're interacting, do they reflect your values? Are you able to, if not, during your non-work time, can you find people who are more like, actually, frankly, like you, Ernest? Like I would seek you out as a friend, as someone to grab beer with, because if I'm working with people who don't exactly vibe with who I'm trying to be in this lifetime, it behooves me to find them after hours, because we do kind of become the average of the 5 people with whom we spend the most time. So that would be another thing. Last but not least, a colleague of mine, Jana Koritz, wrote a beautiful piece in the Harvard Business Review about how we can become enmeshed with our work. Enmeshment is a psychological term that you and I both learned about in graduate school, and it relates to family systems and how we can over-identify with a parent. And many of us over-identify with our work. We say, I am a psychologist. Well, that is true. I am a psychologist, but I'm so much more than that. I'm also a father. I'm a community member. I'm a husband. I'm a son. I'm a friend. I'm all of those things. I'm also a pet owner, as you saw. Yeah. I'm not just so many of us believe that we are only that because we spend so much time doing that and being that, and that we do need to express ourselves in other ways to be more complete. So I love that article by Jana Koretz. I got to give her a massive shout out. She's been a guest on my own podcast, and just what a great contribution to the field.
I love that piece, especially, and it really resonates with me because it was a while back where when I was in a job, I was so enmeshed in it that I thought the job would not survive if I didn't, if I wasn't there, because it becomes all consuming, and I started to inflate my value. And come to find out, when I left, they were completely fine, and so it was definitely one-sided, from that perspective. But it's really important that you need to find connection, and if you can't find it at work, you need to find it elsewhere. So I love that piece that you're saying. This connection is important to who we are as individuals, and so I think this is one of the things I love about your book, right? Connect to others, connect to yourself, connect to something greater, connect to your world. I love those tenets that you've laid out there. Adam, we could go on and on, but I've got to wrap up. So I want to ask, so how do people get a hold of you if they want to continue the conversation, get a hold of your services, or just kind of, send you a note? What's a good way to contact you?
Absolutely. My office number is 408-450-1800. I love it because it's 450 is actually a quarter of 1-800, which is, I just thought it was the coolest phone number ever. DrAdamDorsay.com is my website, DrAdamDorsay.com. You can find my book on Amazon or Barnes & Noble very easily. And yeah, I'd love
Super
to hear from
Psyched,
folks.
right? Super Psyched
What's
is
that?
the name of the book.
Super Psyched, which is 2 words in the book and 1 word in the podcast. Just didn't seem to be right to put that on the book. And got a couple TEDx talks, one on friendship and adulthood, which is a topic I care about deeply. And the other is about men and emotions. I call it Emotions, the Data That Men Miss. So,
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, Adam, thanks so much for coming on the show. I always want to ask the experts that we have on, what's a tip that you have for the audience, especially this time that we're all living in right now?
Absolutely. Well, one of the things I would ask people to do is to watch themselves as if they are being recorded by the camera people on The Office or Parks and Recreation during their off hours. What are you doing with your off hours? When you finally have a weekend, how are you using your time? Many of us are doing some theme or variation on, I'm brewing my coffee, I turn on my Netflix, I'm folding the laundry, I'm answering emails and texts, I'm petting my dog, and I'm doing all of these things at the same time. And somehow Monday rolls around and I don't feel rejuvenated. Yeah. I would want people to actually look at what they're doing and be more intentional about their time off. Might it take some activation energy to go on that bike ride that will actually energize you?
Yeah.
Maybe it will. Maybe you have to pump up the tires and take the bikes off the bike racks and do all the things. But maybe you'll get a bigger return on investment for your use of time.
Yeah.
Think about the things that may require energy from you, but give you energy back. And try to do at least one of those things during the weekend.
I absolutely love that. Like, imagine watching yourself in one of those shows and think about, would you be satisfied with your life? Is this who you want to be? Right. I have this thing with my kids where when they're behaving in a way that, requires a little bit of attention, I ask them, is this who you want to be? Right. And so I love that focus on being intentional. Intentional was one of our family words earlier, because you really have to be intentional to get things done. And I love your thought about thinking about, how are you spending your time? How are you spending your time? Because this shows what's important to you. And while rest is important, do you want to spend the whole weekend just kind of sitting on your butt on the couch watching Netflix, which is fun? I mean, don't get me wrong.
Totally.
Sometimes very valid, but when at the end of the weekend, are you happy that that's what you did? Or do you wish that you'd done something else? That's such great advice, Adam. I really appreciate that. Thank you again for coming on the show. It's been so much fun having you on.
Ernest, total pleasure. Your work is fantastic.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And to our audience, if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing and leaving us a review. Feedback is a gift, and we love gifts. Thanks for listening, and I hope you join us again next time.